I've worked a lot of strange jobs in my life, but nothing compares to the 6 months I spent working the graveyard shift at a secluded rest stop in Northern California. This wasn't one of those big, brightly lit travel centers you see off the main interstate. This was a small, state-run pull-off tucked deep into a redwood forest, miles away from the nearest town. The job was simple: clean the restrooms, empty the trash bins, and make sure no one was camping out in their cars overnight. Most nights it was mind-numbingly boring. I'd sit in the small, glass-walled attendance booth, drinking coffee and listening to podcasts to keep from falling asleep. But during my final month there, things started to get unsettling. The first incident, it started on a Tuesday night in November. The fog was so thick you could barely see the rest area 1-mile sign from the parking lot. Around 2 a.m., a rusted charcoal gray sedan pulled in. It didn't park in the designated spots near the lights. Instead, it backed into a dark corner at the very edge of the woods where the street lights didn't reach. I watched it for a while, expecting someone to get out and use the facilities, but no one did. The car just sat there idling. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Eventually, I had to do my hourly rounds. I grabbed my flashlight and my trash picker and headed out. As I walked past the gray sedan, I tried to peek through the windows, but the glass was completely fogged over from the inside. The only thing I could make out was the faint orange glow of a cigarette cherry in the driver's seat. As I reached the trash can near the woods, I heard the car door creak open. I turned around, expecting a traveler to ask for directions. Instead, a man stepped out. He was tall, unusually tall, wearing a yellow rain slicker that looked decades old. He didn't look at me. He just stood by his open door, staring into the dark tree line. I said, "Evening. Everything okay?" He didn't respond. He just stood there, perfectly still. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the fog. I finished my rounds as fast as I could and locked myself back in the booth. When I looked back out 5 minutes later, the car and the man were gone. The escalation. 3 nights later, the gray sedan came back. This time it arrived at exactly 3:15 a.m. Again, it parked in the darkest corner of the lot. This time I decided to stay in the booth. I watched the car through the glass, my heart racing for no reason I could explain. After a few minutes, the driver's side door opened, and the man in the yellow slicker stepped out again. This time, he didn't head for the woods. He started walking toward my booth. His gait was off, kind of a limp, but rhythmic, like he was dragging one foot on purpose. He stopped about 20 feet away, just at the edge of the light. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, his face obscured by the hood of his coat. Then he raised a hand and pointed a finger directly at me. He didn't move. He just pointed. I grabbed the landline phone and started to dial the highway patrol, but as soon as the first digit beeped, the man turned around, got back into his car, and drove off into the fog. The turning point, I told my supervisor about it the next day. He laughed it off, saying it was probably just some local forest person trying to spook the new guy. He told me to man up or quit. Since I needed the money, I stayed. That was a mistake. The following night, the sedan didn't show up. I actually started to relax. I figured the guy had moved on to a different spot. Around 4 a.m., I went to clean the men's restroom. It was a standalone concrete building about 50 yards from the booth. As I was mopping the floor, I heard the heavy exterior door hiss open. "We're closing for cleaning." I called out without looking up. There was no reply, just the sound of wet, dragging footsteps on the tile. I looked up, and my blood turned to ice. Standing in the doorway was the man in the yellow slicker. Up close, I could see his face. His skin looked like parchment paper, stretched too thin over a skull, and his eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely vacant. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding something much stranger, a small handheld tape recorder. He pressed a button, and a voice started to play. It was my voice. It was a recording of me from 3 nights ago saying, "Evening, everything okay?" He played it over and over. "Evening, everything okay? Evening, everything okay?" I backed into the corner of the restroom, holding the mop handle like a staff. "Get out," I yelled. "I'm calling the police." The man stopped the tape. He tilted his head, and for the first time he spoke, but he didn't use his own voice. He mimicked me perfectly in a flat, mocking tone. "I'm calling the police." Then he just left. He walked out the door and disappeared into the night. In the aftermath, I didn't wait for my shift to end. I ran to my car, drove to the nearest station, and quit on the spot. The police went out to the rest stop an hour later. They didn't find the man or the gray sedan, but they did find something in the attendant's booth where I had been sitting all night. On the outside of the glass, right behind where my head would have been resting, someone had taped a series of Polaroid photos. They were photos of me, one from every single night I had worked that month. Some were taken from the woods, some from the parking lot, and the last one was taken from inside the booth, looking at my back while I was distracted by a podcast. The man hadn't just been visiting the rest stop. He had been living in the crawl space beneath the booth the entire time. I don't work night shifts anymore, and whenever I'm driving long distances, I never ever stop at those small, secluded rest areas in the woods, because I know that somewhere out there, that man is still recording voices, waiting for someone else to ask if he's okay. In the summer of 2019, I took a job as a night security guard for a decommissioned textile mill in Massachusetts. The place was a massive, crumbling brick labyrinth that took up 2 city blocks. It had been empty since the late 90s, and my only job was to walk the perimeter once every 3 hours and watch the monitors in the security hub. The hub was a tiny, cramped room filled with 16 flickering black and white screens. Most of the cameras were ancient and barely functional, showing nothing but static-filled hallways and piles of rusted machinery. For the first 2 months, the most exciting thing that happened was catching a stray cat or chasing off a group of teenagers trying to tag the walls. But in August, something changed. The anomaly had started on a Sunday night. Around 1 a.m., I was glancing at Monitor 4, which showed the basement boiler room. This room was a dead end. The only way in or out was a heavy iron door that stayed padlocked from the outside. As I watched the screen, I noticed a movement. In the far corner of the frame, behind a massive rusted tank, a hand reached out. It was pale, with fingers that looked far too long to be natural. It gripped the side of the tank for a few seconds, then slowly retracted back into the shadows. I stared at the screen for 20 minutes, but nothing else moved. I told myself it was just a trick of the low-light camera, or maybe a large rat. Still, I didn't go down there to check. The basement always gave me a bad feeling, even during the day. The next night I was determined to prove I was just being paranoid. I checked the padlock on the boiler room door during my first round. It was rusted shut, exactly as it had been for years. There was no way anyone was in there. I went back to the hub and settled in. At exactly 2:14 a.m., monitor 4 flickered. The pale hand appeared again, but this time it was followed by a head. A person or something shaped like one slowly crawled out from behind the tank. It was wearing what looked like an old, tattered hospital gown. It didn't have any hair, and its movements were strange, jerky, like a stop-motion film. It crawled toward the camera, staying in the shadows. Then it stopped and looked directly up at the lens. Even in the grainy, low-res footage, I could see its eyes. They weren't reflecting the infrared light like a human's eyes should. They were just two black pits. It stayed like that for an hour, just staring at me through the screen. I was paralyzed. I wanted to call my supervisor, but I was afraid that if I looked away from the monitor, the thing would move. On the third night, I brought a heavy-duty flashlight and a canister of bear mace. I told myself that if I saw it again, I was calling the police and quitting. I sat down and looked at the monitors. Monitor 4 was dark, total static. I felt a wave of relief, thinking the camera had finally died. But then I looked at Monitor 1. Monitor 1 showed the hallway directly outside the security hub. The figure in the tattered gown was standing there. It was less than 10 feet away from the door of the room I was sitting in. It wasn't moving. It was just standing in the center of the hall, its head tilted at an impossible angle, staring at the door. Then the power in the hub cut out. The monitors went black. The only light came from the emergency red LED above the door. In the silence, I heard a sound that I will never forget. It was a soft, wet thump against the door, followed by the sound of someone or something trying to slide a piece of paper under the door frame. I didn't open the door. I climbed out of the small ventilation window at the back of the hub, dropped 10 feet to the pavement, and ran to my car. I didn't even go back for my phone. The next day, I returned with the police. They searched the entire mill. They found the boiler room door still padlocked, and no one was inside. But when they entered the security hub, they found the piece of paper that had been slid under the door. It was a page torn from the mill's old employee logbook from 1984. On it, my name was written over and over again in fresh, wet ink. The police checked the security footage, but the hard drive had been wiped clean for the last 3 days. There was no record of the figure, the hand, or anything else. I don't work security anymore. I work in a bright, open-plan office with plenty of windows. But sometimes when the light flickers, I find myself looking at the floor, waiting to see a pale, spindly hand reach out from under my desk. I've always been a tech enthusiast. When I bought my first house 2 years ago, the first thing I did was turn it into a smart home. I had everything voice-controlled lights, automated locks, and a high-end security system with cameras in every room that I could monitor from my phone. It was convenient, and it made me feel safe. But about 6 months ago, I realized that when you give a house a brain, you aren't always the one in control of it. It started with small things. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and find all the lights in the kitchen turned on. Or I'd be sitting in the living room and the thermostat would suddenly drop to 55 degrees. I figured it was just a firmware bug or a weird sync issue with the app. Then the voice assistant started acting up. My smart hub would randomly trigger in the middle of the night. I'd be asleep and I'd hear that familiar ding from the hallway, followed by the assistant saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat the request? I live alone. There shouldn't have been any requests to catch." One Friday night, I was staying late at the office. Around 11 p.m., I got a notification on my phone. Front door unlocked. My heart skipped a beat. I knew for a fact I had programmed it to auto-lock at 9 p.m. I opened the app and manually locked it. 10 seconds later, another notification popped up. Front door unlocked. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I opened my interior camera feed to see if someone was standing in the foyer. The screen stayed black for a long time, then finally flickered to life. The foyer was empty. The door was closed. But as I watched the live feed, I heard a voice coming through my phone's speakers. It was coming from the smart hub in the hallway. It was playing a recording of my own voice, something I had said weeks ago. "Is anyone there?" the recording asked. And then a second voice, one I didn't recognize, whispered back through the house speakers. Almost. I drove home like a maniac, calling the police on the way. When I arrived, the house was dark. The police searched every room, every closet, and the attic. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no one hiding under the bed. The sergeant told me that hackers sometimes get into these systems just to mess with people. He suggested I factory reset the whole network and change my passwords. I spent the next 3 hours doing exactly that. I wiped every device, changed my Wi-Fi password to something unguessable, and felt a huge sense of relief. I went to bed around 4 a.m., leaving my phone on the nightstand. I woke up at 6 a.m. to a notification on my phone. My stomach did a somersault. I had disabled all notifications during the reset. I shouldn't have been getting anything. I picked up the phone. It wasn't a security alert. It was a memory notification from my cloud photo app, the kind that shows you pictures you took exactly 1 year ago. I tapped it. The photo wasn't from a year ago. It was time-stamped 5:48 a.m. today. It was a picture of me sleeping in my bed, taken from the perspective of the smart camera on my ceiling. But in the photo, someone was standing over me. It was a man in a black hoodie, his face completely obscured. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding my smart hub speaker, leaning down so it was only inches away from my ear. I looked up at the camera on the ceiling. There, taped to the lens, was a small handwritten note on a piece of yellow-lined paper. I stood on the bed to pull it down. It said, "Thanks for changing the password. It was getting a bit crowded in here with the other guys who had it. I didn't stay another hour. I moved into a hotel and put the house on the market a week later. The police never found the man, but they did find something in my basement. Behind the water heater, they found a small, hidden compartment where someone had been living. Inside were dozens of printed-out photos of me eating dinner, watching TV, sleeping. But the scariest part wasn't the photos. It was the fact that the man had hardwired a laptop directly into my home's main server line. He wasn't hacking my house from the outside. He had been the house the entire time. Now I live in an old apartment building. No smart locks, no voice assistants, no cameras. I use a metal key and manual light switches, because every time I hear a digital beep or a mechanical hum, I can't help but wonder, who else is listening? If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. And if you have a scary story of your own, feel free to submit it at the email address in the description. Stay safe out there, and thanks for watching.